just want to say that some people worship God as all, especially Eastern people. In fact, the Buddhist is close to this. They're supposedly not worshipping God, but they value, obviously greatly, the Buddha, the teaching, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the community. But we're all one, the oneness. We're all part and parcel of this vast maze of causes and conditions, you see, in the Buddhist sort of view. The all, or, my letters AU, or, as in August, awesome, in awe and wonder. Even the orb, the orb of the sun, the sphere, the orb. Awe, full of awe. Okay, we've taken that to mean pretty ghastly, but strikingly, overpoweringly, in awe of. And the last part of the word, le, the sound le. First sound is awe, second sound is le. As in Lord. Lo and behold, to loose, to long for, to live, to leave. So the word makes up, doesn't it, the sounds, awe and Lord, all. Of course, in Old Testament view, they thought of God in terms of being king. But the appalling record of kings, not without exception, but in general, hardly wants you to give such a title to God. Doesn't endear you to God, does it? Prince is a bit more romantic and young and innocent of the belligerent authority of totalitarian dictatorship and kings, emperors, even Lord. Look, if you had to call no man Lord, you certainly couldn't call him king. The problem the Quakers had, take your hat off in court. I don't take my hat off. For some reason or other, the Quakers felt they had to keep the hat on and so on, And it was just a contempt of court. In other words, holding the authority of the court in contempt because you're answerable to something higher than them. Well, in short, I guess it's the sounds we use, in the words that we are constantly using and visiting, have or take on gradually, according to their use, a certain meaning for us, a certain response, reaction in the mind. They set the climate, like alliteration, or the masterly use of poetry, choice of words, and which all go together to steer your acceptance or rejection, your inclination to or against, for or against. To have the sort of mind game of reciting the creed didn't just keep repeating what they want to be a particular truth for you to hold. but your reaction, your mental response to the pattern of sounds that you become familiar with and are used in association with other sounds that you have, for instance, some emotive response for or against. The words we use come at a phenomenal rate, even when I'm, absolutely concentrating, focusing, as I do my best to be, of course, when I'm public speaking, or in this case, recording. But the words flow from where? Your access to, as I see it, God's mind must be according to who you are. You come online to God with a certain character profile, which calls out the words appropriate to your inclinations and values that are being exercised in any particular moment. And we say we think aloud, but we are doing the thinking, but in response to a flow of ideas that, well, we're just amazed how they crop up, aren't we? Now, if you have the sort of myopic micro approach, you think it's all going on in the head, in the brain, in the mind, or the mind is some sort of what we apply to the response of the brain to certain stimuli. And it helps if the person's awake to remember what he's thinking, or it's of no use. It must be heavily documented, mustn't it? And we think of it as being documented in terms of words, but it may not be. It may be documented in some other way, which is intelligible in some sort of nervous code, which can be reread at hopefully any time, unless you have a severe memory problem, and used at appropriate, given appropriate stimulus like an emergency or some similar situation that you've had before, and your thoughts roll out accordingly and in the words that are appropriate to it. Now, if you don't have freedom of thought, what we're saying is that this process is seriously restricted in some way, and not to necessarily to your personal welfare. Or it may be specifically to someone else's view of what your personal welfare is or should be for your good or their convenience. You don't know, do you? And if it's your church, you may trust them that they have your interest at heart. If it's someone else's religion or non-religion, you might not. Say more generally that in all communication to each other, it's because one individual, at least, wants to affect, steer, influence another's actions in particular, and almost certainly thoughts appropriate to such. A person who talks little is in some sense cut off from influencing others, and he gets much less in the way of response from others then, so he is much less influenced. Except perhaps in a one-way situation, like when you're lecturing or preaching and you deliberately constrain the situation, or it is very specifically constrained to be one way. It was even considered extremely rude and not done to interrupt a speaker, public speaker, to heckle him or call out some remark or some criticism or question. Could you save questions to the end, please? And by which time, of course, it's all become inappropriate and you've forgotten the context and the whole thing is utterly dead. So in other words, there's no questions in effect, the reality. Unless you get a question that opens up a dialogue between the speaker and someone, at least in the audience. And then it can become real. Yeah. And therefore unstructured, unpredicted, and of course, hard to control. If you're a master speaker, you can still steer it. But you have to sort of do it with the consciousness of your audience being with you. Else you come out of the auditorium, lecture hall, whatever you like to call it, church, feeling a bit shattered. And you don't want that to happen. You just stop public talking if that happens. Well, the recluse, of course, gets away from influencing or being influenced by others because he wants to, in some sense, hear the still small voice of God. And that phrase is meant to be in a respectful way, not a belittling sense, of course. And you might wonder why God speaks so quietly that you've got to go to such extreme steps to gain an audience with him. Yeah, it's suspect, isn't it? I feel I can talk to God at any moment. Instantly and without saying the words, just thought. That's my trust. If I get stuck, I turn to him and I think, what is it, Lord? Tell me. In other words, I'm consciously engaging in awareness of him and of his power and good nature to help me in the situation, which may be to give me what I need or as I think I need it, or not, or something he knows to be better. And so I thrive in the situation of such, simply by being aware of what I understand to be the goodness of God. This is not unusual. Many people do this. Many, many people. Perhaps not as often, perhaps only on formal occasions. But some quiet souls probably do it pretty continuously. Isn't that lovely? We need to become more and more sensitive to the saints that may be around us at any one time. You know how when you talk to a stranger and you suddenly realise, goodness, he's done so-and-so in his life. We'd never have thought that. You know, this ordinary person you're having a cup of tea with or meet or talk to in the street, and you find, wow, fancy that. We entertain angels unawares. Well, it would be so nice to be aware of it, wouldn't it? Someone like Paramahansa seems to have spent his life looking for angels. Or saints, as more generally they're referred to as, isn't it? But people, outstandingly personify what you see as goodness. What you see as goodness as defined by you. And the finding of such company is a great blessing because it encourages you in your values to live accordingly more closely, and so to learn how your values might best be adjusted in the light of your learning. And of course you can go by people that you simply find gel with you and give the sort of spiritual answers that you value. Or you can read the sort of stories and scripture and writings that do likewise. And now we have a newer avenue, don't we? Access to a vast, ongoing, ever-available auditorium, speakers from all over the net, be it YouTube or whatnot, various podcasts in general. Even AI. But don't worship any of it. It's there as interesting choice that may appeal to you. But your love and your worship and your priority is ideally to be loving God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. And if you practice that, you'll find out pretty quickly why that's how it to be. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Well, I wonder if I should just add that if you're devoted to God, you'll find your speeches accordingly. And your speech will therefore, in as far as it's heard by others, affect them accordingly. I mean, quite apart from whether you're deliberately talking about God or not. And sometimes it dawns on you that this person is different in some way. You might find they don't criticize. They don't swear, they don't blaspheme. They're encouraging. And it's not just their words, their manner, of course. All their communication, the way they listen, the way they look at you, the way they smile, the way they react, the way they say hello. Says something about what they believe. It does for all of us. It's just that our language gives a bad report. Our communication, to be rather greater on the point, gives a bad report. Well, I don't want to be unkind, but in some sense it reflects what we're not doing up to the mark, you know. The mouth speaks. Wow, it's that, isn't it? The mouth speaks of the heart. By your words you'll be justified, by your words you'll be condemned. I don't like condemned, a bit emotive. Well, so is justified, I suppose, but you see what I mean? It's the blatant advert of who you are, your values. And not just the sounds you use, but the way you use the sounds. I mean, I'm being pretty emphatic at the minute, aren't I? What am I doing wrong then? Well, I could just be feeling strong and wanting to rescue, but I'm certainly strongly wanting to influence, aren't I? And it's conveyed by the words and the intonation in the words, the sentences, the way I speak, the mannerisms. Fascinating, isn't it? Our God is an awesome God. Well, that's where we started, all. What does the word all mean? Are the Buddhists really worshipping something of their concept of all? All this maze of causes and conditions? Or do they in fact belittle it and think, no, we should just stop the lot and have a blankness that hopefully is bliss and enlightenment, but perhaps it's just blank. It could be wrong, couldn't it? Yes. Well, thank you, Heavenly Dad. Love you. Thank you, Dad.